Do you think you were raised by a narcissist? Are you sure? If you found yourself in a relationship with a narcissist, chances are there might have been a narcissist in your childhood. And that's what we're talking about today at queenbeing.com. 5 signs that you were raised by a narcissist. So, let's get started. My name's Angie Atkinson, and on this channel I offer free daily video coaching to help you discover, understand, and overcome narcissistic abuse in toxic relationships. I like to call it toxic relationship rehab. Sound good? If so, hit that subscribe button and let's get going. How do you know if you grew up being raised by or at least influenced by a narcissist as a child? Well, there are a few signs. Maybe your mom was like Miss Perfect and everybody thought she could do no wrong. Maybe your dad was one of those dudes who was like everybody's BFF out in the world. That doesn't necessarily mean they were narcissists, but if they were, when you got home, your dad was no longer Mr. Wonderful, and your mom, maybe she wasn't quite so kind, or she was very demanding, or she was very concerned about her image. You were the only one who really understood who they were. You were expected to be perfect instead of a child. You were expected to be strong. You were expected to be something that maybe you weren't. When you're raised by a narcissist, a lot of times you grow up feeling like something's wrong with you. And sometimes you might even recognize that your parents aren't like other parents, and maybe those people should get help and try to fix themselves. But the fact of the matter is that as a child, you know better than to request that your parents fix themselves. You know better than to actually request much of anything from your parents. Until you actually discover that there's such a thing as narcissism, you probably go around trying to fix yourself, don't you? Obviously, narcissists come in all shapes and sizes, race, culture, creed, religion. None of this is an issue. Nationality, what country they live in, how much money they make. Across the board, narcissists come out. Has nothing to do with any of that stuff. Has to do with who they are as a person and often how they were raised by someone else. So how do you know if your parent is a narcissist? Well, let's jump right into the signs that you were raised by a narcissist. Number 1, it would be fair to call you a people pleaser. You will bend over backwards to make someone happy, even if it means losing out yourself. And that might be because your narcissistic parent would trample all over you and maybe anyone else in your family to get what they want without really caring much about how anyone else felt in the situation, including you. This leads a lot of adult children to sort of do the opposite of that, to sort of overcorrect and sort of do the whole bending over backward thing to make everybody else happy. Maybe because they were raised by someone who constantly needed that from them, and maybe because they just watched that and they didn't like it. And on the same token, these same people were brought up being told their needs, their thoughts, their feelings, their beliefs didn't matter. And either way, people are now walking all over them simply because they don't even know what they need, and they certainly don't know how to express it. They can't believe that they matter. They are trying really hard to do the opposite of what their parent did, and in doing that, they end up getting walked all over. I have to admit that that was me for a long time, and I still sometimes have those moments where I struggle to stand up for myself. See, when you grow up with a narcissistic parent, you're made to feel like there's something really wrong with you if you have normal needs. You're made to feel like you're crazy or sick if you have normal concerns about things. Selfish, small, useless if you don't become the thing they expect you to be. Often you find yourself even sort of cowering when it comes to authority figures or anybody who seems like they have any kind of hold over you for the same reason, because you grew up in a situation where the authority figure, your parent, or some other authority in your life, had the ability to smack you down and ruin your life in an instant, because that's how they needed it to be. For me, the best way to combat this was to learn as much as I could learn about this disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and to learn how to identify those messages that I grew up with that weren't really my beliefs, my thoughts, my feelings, those messages that were dysfunctional, and then to actively start working against them. Now this brings me to number 2. We're going to talk about your siblings at this point, if you had any. If you didn't have siblings, maybe it was some other child or even an adult, or in some cases a pet. Narcissistic parents have this way of playing you against someone else in your life. Very often, if you have your siblings, one of your siblings. I've talked before about the family that I knew, that the mother had 2 daughters, and each daughter was alternatively the golden child and the scapegoat. And this is common for narcissistic parents. They have trouble with personal boundaries. They view other people, including their children, and often especially their children, as extensions of themselves, not as whole people. They require the most attention. They require all of the praise, the supply, as it were. And what happens is the parent will pick one child or person to be the golden child, and that child will be lifted up. But in addition to getting all the praise and all the positive attention from the parent, the child also is expected to be perfect and has no room for being human. The other child then is the scapegoat child, the one that gets all the blame, never does anything right, is constantly in trouble. And like I said, these roles can alternate between kids and families. And sadly enough, if the roles remain pretty consistent throughout their childhoods, you will experience kids who had two entirely different childhoods in the same house. Any of that sound familiar? Not only that, but you'll be incredibly competitive with your sibling, whether you want to or not. You will always feel like everything you do is being compared to that other sibling. And that's the case especially for the scapegoat, but even for the golden child, because in some cases the scapegoat, despite the abuse, often rises up above the golden child, because the golden child has this really twisted idea of how good they really are, or they have this sometimes rebellion against what they are. And so they kind of fall. Either way, you end up being compared to the other sibling, if that's the case in your family. Any of that sound familiar? Now, if you happen to be the golden child in this equation, you might resent your sibling because they were under less pressure than you. But also, if you were the scapegoat child, you might resent your sibling because they got more attention and apparent love than you. Either way, you have to understand that your narcissistic parent probably intentionally put you up against each other, partially so that you couldn't be closer to one another than to them. It's all about serving their own needs. It has nothing to do with either of you, and it's not your fault. The best thing that you can do is to reach out to your sibling or to the other person in this situation and explain what you've learned and see if you can work something out. If you can't, just move forward and try to do the best you can from here on out. The good news is that in certain ways this could actually work to your benefit, because you could end up really bonding with your sibling over this shared negative experience, and you could sort of rebuild the family that you no longer have as a result of it. Number 3, sometimes you feel like there's more going on than should be going on with your parent. Like when you were growing up, you might have often had to act as your parent's caregiver or their partner, when really they should have been acting as your caregiver. The thing is, not all narcissists grab the spotlight with their sparkly personalities. Some of them get it by playing the victim role and acting like their problems are the worst, acting like they can't function because of how terrible their lives are. On a side note, this also leads those of us who were raised by narcissists to come on out and go, everything's cool, to not complain at all, in some cases even when we should. Narcissists have this way of trying to control other people in whatever way seems to work for them. And if in the past they've done this by threatening to hurt themselves or by acting like they're going to die, guess what they're going to do? They're going to keep playing that stuff over and over again. If you had a parent like this type of narcissist, you might have felt like your whole entire childhood was spent saving your parent, putting out fires and maintaining the peace in the house. You might have been the peacemaker between your parents, or between your parent and your other sibling, or your parents and everybody else in the world. It's a burden. Some of my male clients have said to me that they had to act sort of like their mother's husbands almost, especially when their fathers died, and vice versa for my female clients, acting like their father's wives or even their mother's wives. While they were cooking and cleaning, they were doing all the housework. The boys had to sort of save their moms from the big light bulb. And I'm not going to lie to you, I asked my son to change light bulbs. He's taller than me. But I'm not acting like my life's going to end if he doesn't do it. And I'm going to be really straight up with you. Sometimes it takes him 3 days. Sometimes I just climb on a ladder and do it myself. But the point is, parents who are narcissists make their children feel like they have to take care of them sometimes if they're this type of narcissist. If it's not this type of narcissist, if it's more of the out there overt type of narcissist, then that parent might make the child feel scared because they're angry if they don't do what they want all the time. Some people feel like it was their job to keep their father or their mother from getting angry at the family. It's really all about that sense of drama that as a kid you thought you had to keep everything calm and managed in the home. That's a sign. So how do you deal with this one? Well, this one is a big deal, but I've actually made videos about it. Check out my videos on inner child healing. That's really what's important here. You want to take the time to manage that. You want to acknowledge that inner child within yourself. Ask them what they need. Ask them what they needed that they didn't get. What do they still need that they didn't get? Acknowledge the emotional needs of yourself and that child that you once were. Acknowledge that those needs were not met by your parents. Number 4, you base your value on whether or not your parent or some person in your life thinks you're doing the right stuff. Or you have certain performance-based objectives in your life. Maybe you became a doctor because that's what your mother wanted, or maybe you didn't become a doctor and because of that you think you're not good enough because your father always said to you that you should be a doctor. Maybe you feel like you have to always be on, or you have to be performing, or you have to be the family advocate, or whatever. You may or may not have low self-esteem, but chances are that you might even if you don't realize it. You might be a workaholic because work is the only thing that ever gave you any sort of reward. I'm a little bit of a workaholic, and maybe that's because I get validation from my work. When you learn something that you can produce and share with the world, a lot of times you completely dig into that. You become a little bit more detached, a little bit more self-contained than your parent in this effort to achieve. So chances are you're either going to be a high achiever or you're going to say, I'm not good enough, and so I'm not going to try at all. Number 5. Another way you can tell that you have been raised by a narcissist is that you don't have a really strong sense of yourself. What do I mean by that? Well, maybe you found yourself in a career that you didn't really choose. You kind of just fell into it. Maybe you felt like you never really were sure what you wanted in your life. And maybe you felt like you were supposed to grow up and be what your parents told you to be, or what your mother or father was, because that's what they told you was the right thing to do. Maybe you felt like you had to jump into the family business or something like that. If this is the case and you're still not sure how to handle it because you feel like you're still being sort of directed by your parent as an adult, what are your options? Number 1, you can learn how to gray rock them and try to just deal with them. Number 2, you can totally go low contact or no contact if that's something you feel like you can do. I have videos on that as well. The thing is, most narcissistic parents will never admit or acknowledge that they did a whole lot of things wrong. And if or when they do, it comes out like, oh yeah, you had such a terrible childhood, didn't you? Or I did my best, poor me, how dare you say anything else? Or something along those lines. Sarcasm, anger, or the victim role, one of those things. Or how could you possibly say that? I was the best mother in town, everybody said so, or whatever. The parent is likely to deny any sort of problem with themselves, and if they do see anything wrong with themselves, they're probably going to have some sort of justifiable reason to have had the problems, such as, well, your father left me, or your mother was a drunk, or my job was terrible, or something, some excuse, someone else or something else to blame for the trouble. What it all comes down to is that if you had a narcissistic parent, chances are they did not have empathy for you. So if you are a parent yourself, or if you're thinking about becoming one, and you want to avoid making your child a narcissist, teach them how to care what people think and feel. Teach them to care how people feel. Not just care, but to understand. You can start this at the smallest of ages. As soon as they can speak, they learn that a smile means happy and a frown means sad. As they get older, as they're 5 and 6 years old, you can say to them, how did you feel when this happened to you? You teach them to identify their own emotions. And if you want to teach an 11 or a 12-year-old empathy, you ask them, how do you think it made that person feel when you said or did this thing, or when this person on TV said or did this thing? And as they get older, you just remind them to have empathy, to care how other people feel, but not to allow other people to walk all over them. You have to understand you are not responsible for your parents' abuse. And now it's time for the question of the day. And the question of the day is, did any of this ring true for you? Do you feel like you might be the child of a narcissist, the adult child of a narcissist? Do you think you might have been raised by or otherwise influenced by a narcissist in your childhood? And is that possibly the reason that you ended up with one? Share your thoughts and your experiences in the comments section below. And let's let some fellow survivors know that they're not alone here. All right? That's all I've got for you right now. Thank you so much for being a part of my day and a part of my life. And hey, thanks for letting me be a part of yours. It really does mean a lot to me. I'll see you soon. It's my mission to teach others what I know to be true. You really can create the life you want. Take care of your body. Take care of your soul. Nurture the real you and introduce him or her to the world. Be comfortable in your own skin and in your place in this world. Take your spot. Take it now. And the universe will take its cue from you. You feel me? If so, subscribe to my channel. Let's get it done together.